thank you everybody for coming here this afternoon. I am going to show a short video that really talks about this partnership, and then I will hand it over to Ronnie, our very esteemed host, to introduce everyone.
Two leading research and teaching institutions have formed one alliance to address the world's greatest challenges. The University of Toronto and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem have a history of partnership in research and discovery. Now, this alliance promises to elevate the global profile of both universities and empower leading researchers to address some of the greatest challenges facing society today. It will also build an international entrepreneurship highway that gives student entrepreneurs from both institutions practical experience and training in each other's innovation ecosystems. Help strengthen Canada and Israel's vital and enduring friendship. Now more than ever, our world needs innovative solutions that support the next generation of global leaders.
So thank you all for coming. The guests, the participants, the members of my campaign cabinet, thank you all. This, as you know, U of T and Hebrew University have formed this strategic partnership, this strategic alliance that will demonstrate the close friendship of Israel and Canada through probably the best universities in each country, and will also demonstrate the importance of each of the areas that we're going to focus on. This project, this partnership, this alliance is the benefit of a starting endowment. U of T, Canadian Friends of Hebrew University, and the Halbert family started with nearly $6 million of endowed funds. And we're going to look to the community for the balance, for the rest. It's very, very, very important. I want to introduce some of the major donors. Of course, the Halbert family, led by the late Ralph and his wife, Roz. Ralph was a good friend of U of T, good friend of Hebrew University, good friend of mine. And the family is now led by Roz. And the Mintz family, represented by Harley, Randall Slavens, Lori Weisberg. They're members of my campaign cabinet who are here today. Jonathan Feldman, Perry Kirschenblatt, Nathan Lindenberg, Dorit Navorach, Harley Mintz, Hinda Silber, Randall Slavens, and Michelle Bigot. Today's presentation, we've had a number, but today's presentation I think is very important. It's called the mainstreaming of polarizing and hate narratives. It brings together professors from Hebrew University, professors from U of T, facilitated by Janice Stein. And today, it's very, very important. And the professors from Hebrew University have a graduate student, the professors from U of T have a graduate student there to answer questions. The leaders of this project, the mainstreaming of polarizing and hate narratives, are Professor Tamir Sheafer, of Hebrew University, who's the Dean of the Faculty of Social Services. And Professor Sheafer's research centers on the interaction between media and politics. Professor Shaul Shenhav, Hebrew University, he's the Herbert Samuel Chair in Political Science. And both Professors Sheafer and Shenhav are co-founders of the Deep Story Lab, which develops new methods for textual analysis. From U of T, the leader is Professor Peter Loewen, Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. He's a fellow of many institutions and at present a distinguished visitor at the Institute for Advanced Study at Tel Aviv University. And of course, Professor Janice Stein, originally the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs, now a professor, and the Belzberg professor in the Department of Political Science. Janet has many, many honors. Amongst them, she's a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, member of the Order of Ontario, member of the Order of Canada, and has many, many honorary doctorates. So I'm going to turn it over to Janice and the entire panel for their comments.
And I'm going to turn it right over to Professor Loewen and Tamir, who are going to walk us through the framing of their research project. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Janice. I'm going to do what academics do right now, and I'm going to share my screen to show you our slides. But I'll just say that I'll just say off the top that Tamir and I actually got to work on this in person together last week in Jerusalem. It was my 8th or 9th trip to Israel in the last 8 years. And so much of that trip and that collaboration that I've had with Tamir actually going on 8 years now has been due to the really strong partnership between the Hebrew University and Toronto, to the Halberts and to others who have made it so easy and rewarding for researchers at the University of Toronto to work with colleagues at the Hebrew. So I won't get too I won't be too saccharine here, but I'll just say that Tamir and I are friends because we've had a chance to work together so much, and that's really in large part due to the generosity of people who have supported this partnership between Toronto and the Hebrew. So just thank you very much personally and professionally for that. So let me share my screen to tell you about this project that we're working on, and then I'll say a few words, and then Shaul will come in, and then Janice can facilitate some questions. And our colleague Ron Levy, who's also a professor at the Munk School, is on the call as well. So let me just go ahead and share this with you. Our work is really interested in what we call the mainstreaming of polarizing and hate narratives. And I might just say this right off the top that I think everyone's aware that hate speech, whether it's in the form of anti-Semitism or in other forms, is an almost eternal problem. But we live in a different time right now, where the ability of people to talk to each other, to find people who share similar views, to bring up into the daylight things that were often left in the dark in terms of conversations or were over in the shadows, is more than ever before. And it's partially about the times we're living in, and partially about the emergence of new platform technologies. But it's a worrying time. And the goal of this project is to use the most cutting edge tools we have in social science, many of them actually developed, originating out of Toronto and out of the Hebrew, and using those to understand how people are telling stories to one another in ways that is, as we say, sort of mainstreaming polarizing or mainstreaming hate narratives. That is to say, bringing right into the norm and into the center of our conversations narratives which encourage hate between people. So I'm going to just give you a bit of a framing of that. I'm going to tell you about the team that we've assembled across both of these institutions to work on this, and give you just a bit of a sense of context. And then I'm going to turn it over to Shaul, who's going to tell you about this really amazing research paradigm that that Tamir and Shaul and their team at the Hebrew has been innovating, which really uses the most cutting edge kind of work in computer science and in natural language work and in communication to understand how conversations are happening and the stories that we're telling each other online and in other media. So we've got a really, I think, fantastic team that's been assembled across both institutions to speak to this. You've been introduced to Tamir and to Shaul, but there's other faculty members who are on their team. Professor Cohen, Professor Amsalam, Professor Oshri, who are coming from the departments of communication and political science at Hebrew, both remarkably strong departments. And they bring to that also PhD students that reflect, I think, the strength, I'll say, at the Hebrew University in both computer science and in political science. So from our perspective at Toronto, we feel really lucky to be plugged into a big and interdisciplinary team that's really got a great technology they're bringing to the table. On the Toronto side, our team is led by 4 academics, myself and Ron Levy, who's a professor of sociology and is my colleague here at the Monk School, who's the associate director. And we're joined by Professor Chris Cochran, who is a professor of political science and is one of the leading analysts really globally of political speech online, and by Professor Suzanne Stevenson, who's a remarkably talented computer scientist in the Faculty of Arts and Science. And we combine with these professors a strong suite of a postdoc, a PhD student, and an undergraduate student. So we have Iona, Thomas, and Ori working with us as well. So this is the team, and I'm just as sort of underlined, really happy that we have a history of collaboration that we can build on and really hit the ground running with this project. So what's the context in which this work is occurring? It effectively is the following, that it's always been a concern in Western democracies that there is political discourse that contains hate and derogatory language and incitement towards political and ethnic groups. And it's long been a source of intergroup hostility and prejudice and conflict, and even, as we know, violence. But we live in a different time than we lived in before, where the rise of digital technology makes it possible for actors with extreme views, with views previously at the fringes, to increase their visibility, to push themselves to the center of conversation, and to find people who share their views. Indeed, this matchmaking of people with bad views and people who want to consume it is facilitated, arguably, by platform technologies, which are good at finding people who want to receive different messages. Now, it might seem simple to fix this, but the difficulty of this, among others, is that when we've seen modern attempts to prosecute and condemn, we should say, political actors for using hate speech, the consequence is that this actually sometimes erodes public trust in the institutions which are doing the condemnation or are doing the prosecution. So we've got this difficult bind that we're in, where governments are damned if they do and damned if they don't, in some sense. So one thing that we can hopefully do, at least at a minimum, is to understand how these narratives are propagated, to understand what their deep characteristics are, what makes them compelling stories, and then to find solutions to understand how we can counter these stories at a level of policy, but also at a level of narrative. Now, I just want to highlight a couple of things. One is that the public knows what's going on. So when people are asked, and this was a survey run in several European countries, in 2012 and 2018, when they were asked whether anti-Semitism was a very big or a fairly big problem in their country, you can see that the sentiment, even among the public, that anti-Semitism is a big problem has grown in nearly every country between 2012 and 2018. The public's caught on to this. And where do we see it happening? Well, according to this study, when you look at where the incidences of recorded anti-Semitism are happening across several European or EU member states, what you find is that, yes, it happens in the media and it happens in these traditional things of vandalism of public buildings or cemeteries, anti-Semitic graffiti, desecration of graves, et cetera, et cetera. But the place where anti-Semitism is occurring most is online. And this wasn't there 20 years ago. And now it's there as a tool. And these narratives, these stories find root in the soil of social media. So this is where our team comes in, and what we want to do is to do the following: is to understand how these stories get into, how these narratives about hate get into the mainstream, and how they find their way into everyday conversations people are having, principally online. And then to go a step further and understand what the consequences of this are. What happens when a person who otherwise doesn't have such views is exposed to them in a way that suggests that they're not actually views of the fringe, but that they're views of the mainstream because they're being shared to them by a friend, or because they're being exposed to them on social media, or because they're being endorsed or condemned by political actors. So what our work really wants to do is, I think we could say two things sequentially. One is to understand the nature of these narratives, but then understand what people's responses are to them when they're exposed to them. And the way we'll get at this, and I'll let Shaul dig into this, but the way we'll get at this is doing really three things. One is very in-depth qualitative analysis, and that's just to say deep reading of these things to get a really deep sense of what these narratives look like. But then to take advantage of the massive computing power that we have to not only kind of understand these narratives, but understand their depth and their reach across all things like, for example, all of a social media stream or all of media in the Western world over the last 50 years. And one of the amazing revolutions, to be sure, that we're clear about it, that's happened in social science and in computer science in the last number of years, is that it's possible to effectively identify whether a story is showing up in every newspaper story that's been written in the English language in the last 50 years. That would take a long time to work through those papers. A computer can read through them pretty quickly, and then can do much more than that. But that's the computing power that we can leverage. And then once we identify these things and the patterns behind them, we're in a position to go to people using surveys and survey experiments and understand how they interact with these stories, or how they interact with these narratives. So I'm going to turn it over to Shaul, but I'll just say thank you very much for your time and attention, but mostly thanks very much for the sponsorship of this important partnership and this important, we think, important research. Shaul.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for inviting us. This project that we have just launched, it's as Peter said, it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for two main reasons. One is the fact that capturing hate narratives is not an easy task, because although they are poison, so they poison the atmosphere, but they're not very easy to find. So you have to really develop very advanced methods to do that. And so just in a nutshell, I'll try to show you, just to demonstrate how we plan to address this challenge. And then just to continue, so first is to identify those narratives, and then to try to evaluate their effect, which is a very difficult task, but we're eager to do this challenge. So just to give you the broad idea of how do we combine the qualitative analysis with computer-based analysis. So in terms of the corpus that we're going to use, definitely online and offline news outlets, but also social media. And when we're talking about narratives, it means that, and just to give you a brief idea, we're inspired by classical narratology. So we adopt classical narratology into the study of, into computer-based textual analysis. So we search for narrative elements, which are structural elements in the discourse that we want to find. So the topics, it means what the story is about, plot structures, the actors, terms of temporality, meaning that future events and past events, these are all answer in a nutshell the idea of what is a narrative, and we are eager to find these narratives in those different texts, and then to evaluate how they immigrate from people or from media outlets and so on and so forth. And for that purpose, we're using some models in addition to those who are we're going to use to capture those narratives. For example, anomaly detection, meaning that we try to see when the narrative becomes a dominant narrative, a big narrative, and has some stake on the media. So we're using all kinds of models that we can talk about in the Q&A sections. And then we are going to use survey to evaluate the effect of the narratives. If we move forward, we're based on our lab, which Peter talked about. So our lab is a lab for computational text analysis that really focus on stories, and we can move to the next slides to show you some of the platforms that we have already developed beforehand. For example, a platform that really captures a nuance-based topics across domains and across time. And so these topic modeling infrastructure helps us to identify the topics, what the stories are about. And if you move forward, we can show you some more nuance-based analysis. It's difficult to read, but here you can see that we can actually capture structural elements of the text. Here, for example, we capture texts that are indicating of a problem, something is wrong, and a resolution of the problem, which is one of the basic frameworks or structures of any narrative. Now, we are about to find specific kinds of narratives. So if we move forward, the challenge would be to find very specific narratives, and for that the qualitative analysis and the interface with the computational analysis are very important. For example, you can see here a story about a state senator that got some kind of note, and if we move forward, you can see that the note that she got, and it was published, the note that she got use a code for anti-Semitic discourse, which is 109, soon 110, meaning that it's one of the codes that are used by anti-Semitic discourse, and the ADL collects these codes. It means that before we look for anti-Semitic narratives as an example, one example of hate narratives, we have to know those codes. So we have to do professional analysis, qualitative analysis, in order to train the automatic system to really capture those hate narratives according to this example. If we move one step forward, the previous one, we can see that there are different kinds of hate narratives in the media. One of them is the reports about hate events. The other is the actual hate, the narrators are those who spread those hate narratives. For example, here on Twitter, we see above, we see someone that talks about this intimidating note that that this state senator got with the cue of an anti-Semitic remark. But then we can see other tweets that really push forward those narratives. So we will have to, in terms of the challenge that we're about to face, it's a very nuance-based challenge. We will have to know which kind of narratives is a narrative reporting hate discourse or hate narratives, and which are the ones who really push these stories forward. So this is just in a nutshell some of the challenges that we will have to face. One issue is perhaps Tamir, you would like to jump in. One issue is that those narratives are rare. Okay.
Yeah, I can just say maybe just Peter, the next slide, just I think this will probably end maybe our presentation is that we have to realize that in the endless sea of text that we have around us, hate narratives are rather rare. That this is one thing, and secondly, or because of that, they are extremely difficult to find. So they are, one thing, they are rare, and second thing, this is kind of a not specific, kind of a fuzzy term. You can have different kinds of hate speech, of hate narratives, and moreover, they tend to change all the time. So the big challenge, the great challenge, is how to identify them, how to identify them in a specific time, and on an ongoing monitoring project that we would like to have. And to do that, we have developed a unique method that that actually sees the distances between known terms and relative terms that are new or unknown to us. So the computer learns to find out new hate speech terms and new hate narratives by taking the distance, the narrative distance between known terms, known narratives, and new ones. And this is something that it's completely new. We worked on that very hard in the last few years. We're still developing it, and we will continue to develop it during the current project with UT. And we think that this will help us identify hate speech in a way that is much more accurate and rich than previous research did.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I can just say to all our listeners, you are really hearing about cutting edge technology. As Tamir just said, that is breaking new ground in the way we understand hate narratives, and enabled by the latest work in machine reading and deep learning. So I'm really, really excited about what this research is going to tell us all. We only have 15 minutes, so let me open it to questions. If you just put your hand up, I can see you. That's probably the easiest in real time. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask the team. So maybe while we're waiting, I know there's
I see Ira Lindenberg has a hand up.
Go ahead, Ira.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Very interesting presentation. I think Peter touched on something that I've noticed, and that is sort of combating hate speech. Sometimes I don't think you use the word backfires, but you know, there's all these instances of you know, demonstrations on campus, on campuses, and you know, public presentations, and then there's the effort to sort of dispute them, or and then you know, we or Jews or whoever's combating that hate speech turns into the aggressor. And then, and I think you touched on this, and the means by which you're sort of challenging the hate speech, you know, the institutions that I think you said people lose faith in the institutions, and I think you're alluding to the fact that, you know, the free speech and democracy and the free exchange of ideas. And I think it's really interesting, and it's sort of very difficult to navigate. So I'm just wondering if you could expand on that, and what are your thoughts in terms of how we go forward as a community, and as organizations when faced with those attacks, so to speak.
Peter, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, Ira, I think there's a whole bunch of questions in there, right? Or there's a very long conversation in there, and I think it's a really important one. I think universities have an obligation it's in our own interests to figure out how we can continue to have difficult conversations, because we have to figure this out. It's getting harder to have difficult conversations right now in the world because we're becoming overly censorious, I think, in my opinion, of many things. And it's like the old story about the boy who cried wolf. It makes it hard to actually then raise a flag when when really bad things are happening in some sense. But I think that the way I think about this, Ira, is you can think about this to some degree in terms of whether you want to police things or whether you want to change, police bad things that are happening, or whether you want to try and change behavior at its root. And what I think this project is going to be able to do, if we're successful, I'm bullish it will be, is that it's going to help us understand how these narratives are spreading. So rather than kind of focusing on how do we police this speech or stop it once it's happening, we really want to get at it much closer to its root, to understand how people who are propagating hateful ideas, for example, find ways to piggyback them on other ideas or on other narratives, right? Whether those ideas are patriotism or community or fear of other things. So the idea would be to really understand, with this rise of hateful speech, what's facilitating it, and then to understand better how we might be able to address it earlier on. And I think the benefit of that, Ira, is that we get to it before it's too late, because I think once we get, metaphorically, once you get to people waving signs and yelling at each other, it becomes really hard to constructively address those things. People are already talking past one another, and often the things they're saying are deadly.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Yes, Evelyn.
Evelyn
Yeah,
raised
Evelyn
her
has her
hand.
hand raised.
Evelyn?
I'm thinking in terms that we need a two-pronged approach. Your approach, the research and the work that you're doing, but we need an antidote as well. And because of the situation in the world with environmental immigrants and war and famine, the world is on the march. We'll have more and more different ethnic groups coming to Canada and moving all over the world. We have to tackle it with the educational system at every level, from the youngest, to introduce the concept of loving your fellow man, understanding the differences, looking at them with fascination and curiosity and not hatred and anger. And when people come from a foreign country, they bring their prejudices, their anger, their hatred, their stereotypic ideas, which won't be changed when they arrive in a new country. And the best way we can tackle that is to take the child at pre-K and K and grade 1 and all the grades, to have courses in accepting the other. If we don't actively work on that, all the research in the world, all the ideas, because of the internet, the hatred that is spewed out exponentially against the Jew, we're in very serious trouble if we don't have a little bit of an antidote and make an effort to have an alternative approach.
Tamir, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, of course, I of course agree. This is the second side of the other side of the coin. Our goal in this project is to provide, one of the goals is to provide educators and policymakers and the public in general information, more knowledge about, to expose them with these hate narratives against, either against Jews or against other minorities. It's important to know. We don't want to focus only on anti-Semitism, but we, in order to understand hate speech against Jews, we must also understand it in a larger context of hate speech against other minorities by exposing the this system of narratives. We can learn how to identify them. We can let everybody know how to identify them, and then this would be, and then the education system, for instance, will be able to use it to explain to children what it is, what does it do? I mean, in the last part of the project, we will do experiments to understand the effects on people. So we will be able also to show children the hate narratives and what does it do to people. And that's the strengths of this project.
Tolerance doesn't seem to be a natural instinct. I think it has to be taught. And with you in your positions of influence and the area of your study and research is such that you could communicate with ministers of education and people at the higher level to actively institute if we're waiting for it to happen by itself, it will never happen. We have to take an aggressive and active role in putting the parts together that might lead to a positive attempt to teach tolerance from the earliest grades until perhaps when you graduate at 18, you love your fellow man and have not been left to your own devices to figure out how you're going to treat the other in your society.
That's an excellent point.
Just to say one thing about that Peter and I actually in our long projects that we are involved in, we study also politicians and how different presentations, different narratives affect the behavior of politicians. And so in various countries, in Canada, in Israel, in other countries. So this is definitely goes into our longer project.
Anybody else with one?
Yes, yes,
question?
we have Marcia.
Marcia, over to you. What?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Marcia.
It's actually Marcia. Do any of you know Professor Ronnie Porat? Because she's a Hebrew U prof, and she gave part of a Zoom recently where she talked about prejudice reduction, which isn't as obvious as you would think. So I'm not sure from what she said that teaching the junior kindergarten kids is really going to be as effective as we wished it were. Is there something where you're working with somebody with that kind of background? So
yes, Ronnie Porat is our colleague. She's in the faculty at that time, the dean of and with the same department as Shaul and myself. She's a young and brilliant faculty member there, a political scientist. And she and other scholars in our faculty, which are the leading scholars like Professor Eran Halperin, that are the leading scholars in the world in terms of how to approach or how emotions play in conflicts. So yes, it's not, I mean, educating people is not easy. It's not an easy task, but definitely what I can say that we're gonna interact and cooperate with scholars like Ronnie Porat and like Eran Halperin in the second phase of the project, after we will identify the narratives, and while doing the experiments that will be led by Peter, we will interact with these colleagues as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just say that's one of the great benefits of the grant that when we go to Hebrew for a visit, Tamir is in a position to invite not only the team but across his faculty, the people who are leading research in this, to engage with us and to collaborate. If I could just, Janice, just add one more thing.
Sure.
The important thing here is what we're interested in is hate speech as you might think about it, but traditionally, but not just hate speech, also just the torrent of lies and misinformation that wash over the internet that make people think things that are untrue, right? And we have to think about tolerance and correcting people's incorrect views of groups, but we also have to be in a position to attack things at the level of stories, right? And stories aren't always hateful in their content, but they can be hateful in their result when they spread misinformation about other people about other countries. So I just want to give you, just kind of underline the breadth of what a narrative means. It's much more than just a direct idea that this group ought to be despised, right? It could also be that country can't be trusted, right? Or those things you're reading aren't true, and these things that erode people's trust in others over time.
So I'm mindful of the time. I just want to take a moment for everybody who's on the call to say how important this program is, this Research Alliances. You probably have a feel. There's just an extraordinary team at the Hebrew University, led by Tamir and Shaul, but with a reach into computer science, literature, political science, sociology, which brings the best minds. And Peter and Ron from the Monk School also have a similar kind of reach. And when I listened to them, I read the proposal, but when I listened to them talk, it's better. Even in your written proposal, is all I can say. They are doing really cutting, Ron is a criminologist, they are doing cutting edge research at the intersection of deep learning and using the latest in computer science technology to tackle what is a very, very old problem, but in very, very innovative ways. So frankly, this exceeds our expectation. Those of us who led the formation of this alliance, right? We'll invite you back again and again to tell us what you're finding, because you hear this is a multi-phase journey. Inform the best research, but then taking that research out, doing experiments, understanding how we tell the story to political leaders. It's just truly so exciting that the two universities have come together this way. And I'm sure I'm going to preempt Ronnie when I say we need all of your support to grow this in computer language, 10x it, make it 10 times bigger, so we can continue to assemble this kind of really just world-class talent. So over back to you, Ronnie.
So I just want to thank the professors, Tamir and Shaul and Peter and Ron and Janice. This was an outstanding event, and it demonstrates your alliance. And we want this was founded by an endowment established by U of T, Canadian Friends, and the Halbert family. To the community, we want to raise so big gifts, whatever you can give. We want to. We need it, and this alliance will have an impact on both Canada and Israel and the whole world. It will have a positive impact, and we believe it will be sound. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and we're going to go forward and with all our best efforts.
Thank you, Ronnie, and thank you everyone for spending the time with us today, and thank you to the professors and the researchers, and we look forward to hearing more. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.